Two men in a stool. Reggie, we just had a very, very interesting conversation with a principal, a friend of ours, and a mentee, Larry Gifford. And we always pushed back to the point where we saw him come to tears about a statement. I'm going to just quote that statement once again from Condoleezza Rice. And I don't think she meant it in a derogatory fashion, but in some ways, it's a true statement. And the statement says, if I can look at your zip code and I can tell whether or not you're going to get a good education, we got a problem. That statement means so much, and it meant so much to Larry because he thought that reflected him. And he looked at it from that angle. But we say, when you look at the data, there's actually data out there that supports that statement. So we're going to take a few minutes to delve into those points and talk about some of that data around that statement, around zip codes, and what makes that so obvious.
You know, Tony, I think first of all, our role is not to offend anyone. But if there's something going on, then we need to, what we used to call, air that dirty laundry. And if your school is performing in spite of all these factors that that Condoleezza Rice mentioned, then that's great.
Right.
But I also think it ought to make you want to catch fire like Mr. Gifford caught fire. Larry caught on fire. He was mad, angry, because now you're putting our kids in one big box. So I think it's worth explaining the context of that statement. This is not something she just said because of. There's research that actually backs up her statement. Unfortunately, it creates an environment of a mindset of a have and have nots. And when you say, if I can look at your zip code to determine whether or not you're going to get a good education. Now, who decides, okay, my child shouldn't get a good education? But what she's saying, there's a lot of research that backs it up. And I just want to talk about
Let's look at those
the context of what the research is saying.
So some of those research, when we look at the points, some of the big bucket points, because there are probably so many more points that we can make when we look at funding disparities. Let's talk about the funding disparities.
So in the research, when you talk about funding disparities, what it says from the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, not a state, the U.S. Department of Education say education funding in the U.S. is often tied to local property taxes. Which means that in addition to what you're getting from the federal government, you're also getting more money from local taxes. So if I have a whole bunch of people who are making seven figures in the community, and I'm getting additional money to my school from property taxes, it says schools in wealthier areas receive significantly more funding, leading to disparities around resources. I hate to say it, it also says around teacher quality and facilities. That's not us saying that. The U.S. Department of Education talks about that. That's sometimes one of the factors of why some schools get more than other schools.
So I just want to push back when you bring that point up. So if I live in a $850,000 home, I pay taxes for an $850,000 home. So that same amount of taxes goes to that school in that neighborhood. If I live in a $225,000 home, I pay taxes for that school, for that home, and those same taxes go to that school in that neighborhood, which is probably different in the taxes.
Think about it. If I'm paying more on taxes, then more money going to the local schools. I can build more buildings. I can build better schools. Why is it that some schools don't have the same amount of resources? All schools are not created equal. And that's one of the challenges when she makes that statement. That's one of the 6, I think, components that we looked at, that I looked at. It relates to what's the data that, and we always say, is it data driven? That's one of the statements, funding disparities. Higher taxes, more money to the local school system.
So we had a principal, Larry was here early, and we talked about serenity. You know, serenity can only take, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. This school is in this neighborhood. The courage to change that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Once you know the difference, how do you make those changes as it relates to funding disparities?
Well, I think that's the thing that we're saying, and I'm constantly beating on my chest, and I'm really hitting my heart, because what we're really saying that sometimes There are things you can't. Serenity says, I can't do nothing about, in many cases, the funding disparity. As a principal, as a
Right,
leader,
right.
as a teacher, I can't do anything about the
Gotcha.
funding disparity.
Right.
So I can't waste a lot of time in areas that I can't do anything about.
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So I need to then have the courage to move on and do the things I can because I can't change
Gotcha.
the tax base as a principal. That's a little bit above my pay grade.
So
But that doesn't mean I give up. I got to do other things.
So the next point, we talk about school quality by location. So let's talk about the quality of a school based on where it is. Is that what school quality by location means? When you look at the research.
That's exactly what it's saying. But I go back.
So you went to school in Bankhead. I
What
went
do
to
you
school in Bankhead, Atlanta.
Bankhead Court in Atlanta. Yes.
So you're telling me that the quality of your school might have been a little bit different than where I went to school at in Southwest Atlanta, Beachy Hills Elementary? I know it's a loaded question.
Well, it's kind of loaded, but it also making me look like it's making me think like, because sometimes as you know the neighborhoods and the locations,
Yeah,
sometimes
right.
you get pegged. So the question is, do you want your child to go to that school? And children or parents, sometimes when you think about busing and you start thinking about what schools, that's the school your area is located.
Oh man.
I can't go over here to the school where the houses and just say the houses are running $2 million. I can't just send my child over to that school. But it's another way of looking at it.
So what does the research say about that? I mean, you talk
Well,
about that.
well, the research says, and it's so interesting, the National Center for Education Statistics shows that students in affluent neighborhoods, when you look at that word affluent neighborhoods, typically attend higher rated schools. And how are they rating these schools? They're rating them on academics, they're rating on behavior, they're rating them on kids going off to college, doing well on very standardized tests. So, but the report found that schools in low-income areas are often not only under-resourced, but also have a higher teacher turnover rates.
How crucial is that teacher turnover rate?
Oh man, think about it. Think about that teacher. We know some schools, first of all, let me be the first to say, and I say it every podcast, and that is our teachers are underpaid. And sometimes we need to find ways to value them. Because imagine if every teacher decided to go off and be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, who's going to teach the doctors and the lawyers and other people to be motivated to go do those wonderful things? So we know it all starts with a teacher. As a retired military colonel myself, I don't know why we don't call teachers first responders because in many ways they are first responders to the needs in building the students.
Right.
So school quality by location is another one of those things that they looked at when they made that decision to put that statement out that I can tell the quality of your school by your zip code. Quality by location.
Not that we're trying to validate that statement, but when you look at the research behind that statement, we're looking at the points that give you the ability or the weight to be able to make that type of statement. When you're talking about access to advanced courses, everybody got access to advanced courses, right?
Well, no.
Oh my God.
No. And the reason for that is a myriad of reasons. But again, the U.S. Government Accounting Office, the GAO, doing their research, they found that students in low-income zip codes, let me say that again. Students in low-income zip code have less access to advanced placement courses and gifted programs. So what that's telling me, okay, student in low-income area, if you're telling me that AP courses and gifted classes will take me on to another level, then we have students starting off in something called the 9th grade or even in the kindergarten or 1st grade. We got students that are running that race because they're getting extra. They're moving at a higher level than some students that are not. I'm not saying it's the only indicator, but what I am saying that the U.S. GAO found that students in low-income zip codes have less access to AP courses and gifted programs, which limits their opportunities for academic advancement. It becomes a little more limited.
But that doesn't have anything to do with income and taxes, though, does it? Is it just that they're not offering the courses in those areas, or the resources doesn't say that this area or this zip code deserves those classes?
Well, I think, again, so many. If I'm at a school, let's think of. I'm going to attempt to not minimize, but give you a very simple one. If I'm at a reading level and I'm 12 years old and I should be in the 6th grade, and I should be on grade level or the 3rd grade or on 3rd grade reading level, 4th grade reading level.
Right.
That means I should be on my.
I got
But
you. I got
how
you.
can I take an advanced course
If I had doing the basics.
if I don't have the basics? I don't know how to read
I
on
got
my
you.
grade level.
I
But
got
yet,
you.
so
So
it's not. It's a combination of things.
It doesn't make sense to offer advanced courses if I'm not reading on my grade.
Well, that's the point. We still have some students that we should have there because they need to excel. I'm not saying it's one or the other. I'm saying that it's not as simple as saying, let's just offer
I got
courses.
you.
There's so many other things going on that we need more students, we need more offering, and we need to raise the expectation from the students, the parents, and the staff.
So that
and the
kind of
school.
that kind of leads to the next data point that supports, unfortunately, that statement. When you're looking at what we call achievement gaps, that's almost we bagged into that, right?
Right, because again, I'm quoting these credible entities that actually did the research
gotcha.
that supports
Gotcha.
Condoleezza Rice's
Gotcha.
statement. I'm not saying we should be mad at her. I'm saying we should go deeper and find out why they're saying it,
right.
and be like Mr. Gifford, be mad about it. But what the Education Trust, another credible organization, said, and they reported that students from low-income families, often concentrated in certain zip codes, tend to score lower on standardized tests.
Right.
When we're making a comparison, a lot of time we make it based on testing, compared to their peers from more affluent areas, indicating for me and for the research,
Wow.
systemic
Inequality.
inequities,
Yeah.
inequality.
Yeah.
You got to go beyond
Yeah.
that. It's so beyond that, and that's why if the achievement gaps are there, and Education Trust is stating that lower income families, often concentrated in certain zip codes, it supports what Condoleezza Rice is saying when they compare standardized tests.
So when you look at achievement
or reading
gaps,
levels, etc.
when you look at achievement gaps, right, who does anything about it? I mean, when you say if you know it exists, and you know that it's causing this particular statement to have validity, who takes the data and does something about it when you talk about achievement gap?
But I think schools are. I think it's innate for schools. I think schools are driven based on data. We always hear about data research. We know that states and systems
Right.
are reporting how your students are performing.
Yeah.
Their math letter, their Lexile scores.
I'm
So
sure.
we know that they're doing that, and that's an indicator. Before we say let's keep doing what we've always done, we know we need to do something different. Thus, even when we talk about our work, and so I don't think that is not a canned answer. But schools are focused on that, and that's part of what they're doing or should be doing. Because if I know what the data is telling me, data informs. I like to say data informs. Data informs. Stories inspire, but data
You say that all the time.
informs.
You say that all the time. Yeah.
Stories. Yeah, they tell you something, they give you feel good about it, but at the end of the day, I want to know if my kids are performing well based on what the standards are. And if I can get my child to reach those standards, if I can get all of my students,
Right.
that's what we're comparing to. Albeit, I can't change that socioeconomic environment.
So this is
Parenting matters.
You know, that
Leadership matters.
People need to know that this is your sweet spot. This is, you'll talk about that all the day. Me, I'll listen to you. But when you look at these things and they talk about longitudinal studies, how does that play into validating this statement? Well, not that we're trying to validate this statement, we're trying to shine light on it. Like we said earlier, we're going to bring out those bad points and we're going to expose it so we can fix it. How do you look at
I think,
longitudinal
again, you're
studies?
talking about sometimes we got to share that dirty laundry. So when I think about longitudinal studies, the Brookings Institute, which a lot of people, another credible organization. The Brookings Institute shows that neighborhoods with high poverty rates correlate to low educational outcomes and lower rates of college enrollment and completion.
Wait a minute.
Let me make sure I say that again.
Please.
The Brookings Institute did some research, and what the research shows is that neighborhoods, the community I live in, what Condoleezza Rice was talking about, where high poverty rates correlates to lower educational outcomes and lower rates of college enrollment and completion.
Reggie, you ain't gonna like
So in
this.
other words, let me simplify it for you. Go ahead. I'm going to simplify
You
it
ain't
for
gonna
you.
like this, and I think I'm gonna simplify it for you the way you were getting ready. You tell me stories about Bankhead Court.
Yeah.
You tell me stories about your picture being put, was it the post office or the laundry room?
None of those. The post office or the lunchroom. It was in the rent office.
In the rent office.
My mother.
And what was the statement up on the picture?
The picture said that Reginald Beaty. It was an article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution back in, I want to say around 1988, 89. And it said, Reginald Beaty, a native of Atlanta, Georgia, grew up in Bankhead Court, was selected as the best instructor in the nation for all colleges and universities. And of course, my mom, at the time, Bankhead was considered one of the worst neighborhoods in the country for violence, crime, and all those other things. And it said that Reginald Beaty, who came from this tough neighborhood, you always talk about our neighborhood, and we know how we were labeled, but sometimes, as I like to say, sometimes good people do bad things. But the point that you're making is,
Based on the longitudinal study.
It says that students who come from the Bankhead Court community are not going to be successful, and they're definitely not going off to college.
So it's true.
Well, I'm not going to say that because it's true, because I hate to believe that the education system is bankrupt.
How many people that you went to school with went to college? I ain't trying to put you on the spot, but I'm just going back to the longitudinal study, and I'll leave it alone.
I only know in my class who I graduated with. I don't know in my class. I don't know anyone else of the 70, 100, however many students.
But not that they didn't go over to do great things, but that you know of.
I don't know of anybody. During that time, I was considered the first college graduate. So I don't know anybody else in my neighborhood except for one other young lady that I knew. Now, behind me, there are probably more students, way more, obviously, because I have family members behind me that have grown up in that community. But again, it's a matter of creating that environment regardless. Why do poor people survive? Grit, resiliency. And so I refuse to believe that the education system is bankrupt for poor students.
You say that a lot, yeah.
I refuse to believe that, because if I do that, then I'm falling in line with everything else, that just because you're poor, you can't be successful. Right. And that's the furthest thing from the truth for me. But it does take that extra work. It does take what we call that three-legged stool. It does take that home, and it takes that student. That student has a role. And you have to want this regardless. And so when you think about that study, I know what the research is saying, but what it should do is motivate us to want more and to want different, to want better.
And when you look at the longitudinal study, it always lends itself back to community resources. What's available in your neighborhood? Well, I'll put it like this. What's available in Bankhead, not available, or what's available in Buckhead, not available in Bankhead.
Same thing applies. When you start thinking about community resources, and it's so interesting, when you start thinking about community resources, let's look at it in the context of the Annenberg Institute for School Reform. They emphasize during their research that communities with less resources, such as libraries, access to libraries, extracurricular activities, and parental engagement,
one of the legs,
often correlate with poor educational outcomes.
Wow.
But yet we're expecting schools by themselves to create. But if they're already behind and they don't have those same resources, community resources that other schools have, and it does require a community approach, and even more so in some of the schools and the systems where we're working at that has limited resources. So it's not them just saying things, and I want to make sure that the listening audience get it. What we're really trying to do is to inform. And not be mad at Condoleezza Rice for making it the bold statement, because in some ways it's true. But it's not necessarily something you just put everybody in a big salad bowl and say all schools are that way. But what it is identifying those zip codes. Sometimes if you had a choice to go to this school or you had a choice to go to that school, what choice would you make? Where would you send your child? That's, and so it's as simple as when we think about what the research said, let's not get angry. I want you to get angry. I want you to be mad. I really want you to be mad.
MAD, mad.
MAD, mad, meaning make a difference.
Right.
Not mad, angry, because that's not going to do anything to move the trajectory of where our students are going and the educational outcome. So I think it was important. I think we thought it was important that we break that statement down and not leave it out there just as a statement, but the context of that statement.
But I think something else happened though. We've now been tasked to take those points and to break them down and bring experts on to talk about each one of those points around longitudinal studies. When you talk about community resources, we got to take each one of those points because that's a show by itself. Just talking about those studies,
that's right.
Talking about those community resources that are not there. And how do you take the Larry Giffords of the world that hear about all that stuff and say, I know what's going on in my community, but I'm not going to accept it. I'm going to step out and say, what can I do to avoid this stuff? If I know that stuff is going on, if I know the kids are not having access to higher learning, I'm going to bring in higher learning.
That's right. But you also got to look at all 6 of these points and say, okay, of these, let's put it on the left, all 6 points. Over here on the axis, you got the X and your Y axis. Here are the things I can do something about. Here are the things I can't.
Right.
I can't change disparity. I can't change disparities in funding. So I may not need to put nothing in there. But there are some other factors here that I can do something about. We can do something about the lack of parent engagement.
Right.
Schools should not be held responsible by themselves. Your child need to come to school ready to learn. That's what schools are asking for. So when you start looking at these, I agree. We're going to break these down over the course of the podcast or the talk show. We're actually going to talk more about these as we go and bring in additional guests.
Yeah.
So I think it was important.
It was,
I think it was important. I don't think that. I know it's important that people understand what this really means.
Not as entertaining, but more of the education. Because sometimes now you got to slow down to dig a little bit deeper. Because if these things exist, now that we know, because we said we're going to expose the bad.
That's right.
But once you expose them, you're not doing anything. You don't come up with solutions.
That's right.
So we're solution oriented.
That's right.
Now that we know what the problem is,
that's right.
We're going to bring in people that know how to get beyond these things.
That's
so our task is, on upcoming shows, we're going to break them down a little bit deeper.
Go deeper.
When you talk about 2 men and a stool, we're also looking at, we got a responsibility. Once we find this information out, we got to do something about it.
I totally agree. And you know, again, it's important. It's important. Why are we doing this? We're doing it for our babies. We're doing it for our kids. We cannot have, and we're doing it for the schools. We're doing it for the teachers. Literally, we are all in this together. When you point a finger, just remember one is coming back at you.
5, 3 or 4.
You got how many?
3 coming back.
You got 3 coming back at you. So stop pointing the finger. Let's be part of the solution as we think about it. But that doesn't mean we're not going to err and talk about it, because in order for us to address it, we must understand.
I feel like I had a data guest on here this afternoon. I want to thank you, data guy. Good job. We'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you. On my own show, I'm a guest. No, really. Appreciate it.